This is the briefing video for the 14th of November 2022, 6 p.m. Board of Trustees meeting. Opening like normal, of course, with the call to order, invocation and pledge, roll call, approval of agenda, approval of past meeting minutes, the treasurer's report, paying the bills, the fire department report, and the planning commission report. After the first public comments, we get into the decision items. In this, so I included this all in one packet because I thought the stuff was relevant enough to make it into one instead of parting it out into a reference packet. And the agenda did go just slightly onto a second page. So, first of all, we have the quarterly budget adjustments. And Tracy was coming in, and Lori was leaving in the clerk position there, and Lori had been doing the quarterly budget adjustments and wanted to, be involved with quite a bit of that budget stuff. It does fall under the supervisor, so we ended up delayed on the quarterly budget adjustment. And then I wrote them up a little differently in here with kind of explanations. And I want to do that over this winter as I'm preparing the budget for the spring as well. And the meetings we'll have in March and the budget starting in April. And so that'll be similar there. And a few things to adjust. The explanations are in there, which is the nice thing about doing that. Next, we have 11 motions on what I'll generally term accessory boards. So there's Board of Review, Planning Commission, and Zoning Board of Appeals. A number of them, most of them, are reappointments. And I knew those terms were coming up and was planning on doing them near the end of this year here because a lot of them come up in December. But we also did have some resignations as well. And then we have one person resigning from the one board and moving to the other one. So it ended up being quite a bit. And so we got the two Board of Review appointments. These are reappointments. We have the one resignation. I don't have someone that I'm appointing to fill in that spot yet. I've had a couple of people that may have been interested in also putting in for it, but haven't actually received the applications. So if anyone is interested, get me the application for the Board of Review. There's one on the website, or you can pick them up in the office here, or you can message me, email me, supervisor@daltontownship.org, and I'll email one back to you if you want as well. And then the Planning Commission, we have appointments, again, which are the reappointments. We have one resignation, and this was for scheduling issues, that type of thing. So we have a new person going in there. And because Kevin is new, I had him write up a short bio, just like everyone that I've appointed to these types of boards. The reappointments I don't have because the best information about them is going to be what they've been doing at meetings, which you can look at the various records and stuff like that. Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals. You can look at the minutes and you can look at the video as well. Then we get into the Zoning Board of Appeals, which we have two reappointments again, and we have a resignation. The resignation here and the Board of Review were the same, and they were for a medical reason. And then we have the appointment to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is new, but the person from the Planning Commission, Nick. So that is a lot. There's a lot of those, right? The information is in there if you want it, basic information, but nevertheless. Next, we have the land bid opening for Drexel and Putnam. This is the one that we had established as $11,000 total. Actually, both these are $11,000 total. This one's on Drexel and Putnam. It was the two pieces that aren't quite connected. And then land bid opening for the piece on River, which was also established at $11,000 for a minimum bid. Next, we have the land sale. We have a land sale request on East Daniels, so that's a new request. And because we went to this 3-step process for the board, what I've been doing now is calling that first step, where the board is determining if it's going to go out for bid and how we're going to think about setting the minimum in the next meeting. I call that the land sale request. The land sale proposal, the one where the board is voting on and setting the minimum bid. And then the third one, where we're actually opening the bids, the land bid openings. Next, we have the truck bid opening for the 1988 GMC Sierra. And we have bids for that already. Normally bids come in on the last day. So I know why, because I've talked to people about it. Like, why do you wait until the last day to put in the bid? And because they think the bids are going to get shared around with people. But I don't. The bids stay sealed. These are the ones for the truck, and it's sealed. And I know it's like, I guess people, you could unseal them and reseal them. And I know people are shady. I get it. But nevertheless, I just throw them in that box right there and wait until the moment, so there's no real advantage of bidding last as far as I can tell. But it is unusual to have 3 bids early like that, which we do have for the truck, which we'd establish as a minimum bid for $1,500. Next, we have the Township Hall roof, and this is a change. So, because the board was kind of balking and indecisive on moving forward with that, which may be serendipitous, may have worked out well. Because I contacted Bob's Roofing several months ago, and they hadn't gotten back to me because a lot of people are delayed on getting quotes out and that type of thing. Nevertheless, we had 4 other roof quotes, and so it seemed reasonable to make a decision on that. But Bob's Roofing specializes in these types of torched roofs. When they came and checked it out, they said an entire roof replacement isn't necessary. Extensive repairs are. Nevertheless, that quote is a lot less than an entire replacement, and which had varying quotes as well. And so I think that should resolve that, and we can get that going and move forward with that. A bit odd because I had someone else scheduled. I was on their list actually as a fill-in for getting some of the roof repaired, because I wasn't going to just leave it completely as is and just hope that it makes the winter. But it's hard to tell, depending on what if the board is actually going to be able to make a decision on moving something forward. But the weird little delay that didn't really make logical sense may have worked out well in this case because of that other bid, that company finally getting hold of me. So there we go. Next, we have the Village Zoning Administration contract. Been working this out with the village, and their zoning administrator and building inspector, which are the same person, Val, he is stepping away from those roles, and the village talked to me about having our zoning administrator here, Steve, at the township do that. And it makes the most sense. I brought this up a little bit at the joint session. We talked about it. No one really had any questions, but it makes the most sense for the township to contract with the village. And so I've included that entire contract in here if anyone wants to read it. I'd gone to the last village meeting. Their council seemed on board with everything and fine with that, because obviously our board and their council have to pass the same contract. And so if we pass it now and they pass it later in the month, in November still, should be able to start on December 1st and move forward with that. And that should work out well. Next, we have the Treasurer Resolution. This is 2022-20 for small claims court. And then so that Christie can pursue delinquent taxes in small claims court, where if it gets to a high enough level, you can have the lawyer do a civil action in district court. But if it's below, right now it's $6,500, it's at the first of the year, I think it's going to raise it $7,000, that can go to small claims court, which means just someone from the township can represent. It's within the duties of the treasurer and deputy treasurer to go and do that, but they still need authorization, or should have authorization from the board to represent the township in court. And so that's what that resolution is for, and will be in effect just moving forward. Next, we have the Water Policy Ordinance, and this was mostly about the mandatory connections, but myself and Kim from Laketon had pointed out there were a couple of errors in the nearby section that nothing changed in, and so those were fixed from quarterly to monthly on one bit, so that word in a few different places, and then one aspect of where money could come from to not be counted as something else. So a couple of adjustments there, but mostly the focus is a mandatory connection. We've obviously been talking about this for months at our board and at the Water Policy Board, and going back and forth and that type of thing. I've included it in there along with the red line version just because I wanted to include that information as well. Part of why this packet is a little bit larger is because I included that full contract. I included even the old roofing quotes, even though they're outside of the dates that they'd be good for now, but just so we can compare those types of things. And I included the ordinance for the water policy plus the red line version. And next we have the zoning ordinance, and so the water policy ordinance was 2022-08. Zoning ordinance would be 2022-06. This is primarily for solar. There was one minor correction on a reserve section, but it's for solar energy in residential to be approved just through Steve, through the zoning administrator, rather than having to go to the planning commission, because it's extra expense, it's extra time, it's extra paperwork. And essentially the planning commission is just rubber stamping those because they have to meet the parameters. There's no reason for those to not just be administrative approval. That brings us through our decision items. Next, we're on to our discussion items. The first one I have is lake treatments. And this comes up because a couple of different people approached me at the fire open house, and they were talking about, specifically West Lake, they were talking about, that there's not very many fish. The fish aren't surviving, even though they stock it with fish. They raise money there, and they stock it as private individuals with fish there. And a lot of the weed beds have died off, not only the invasive species, but also the native species. And so they were inquiring into stopping the treatments from Professional Lakes Management, from PLM, which there's a special assessment for raising the money for doing the lake treatments. And the alternative that we could do here, which, lakes are controversial anyways everywhere that there's people that live on lakes. It's just its own special thing. I've been in meetings online where there are people from all over the state getting training on zoning and those types of things. When you bring up lakes, people are like, oh, the lake people. It ends up being a whole thing because it's a shared resource, so you end up naturally with a tragedy of the commons, which the government is as a whole, and then lakes are too, so you got multiple levels occurring here. Nevertheless, I think it'd be difficult to say that we're doing a special assessment for treatments and then just decide to not do treatments. That would be odd to do. And so I kind of want the board to see where they would be, and obviously the Knights live on a lake, and so they'll know more people that live. That's on Twin Lake. It's a different lake than West Lake, but nevertheless. If we should have like a petition, something like that. And then I included the quotes from PLM about the treatments for this year, which they include a little section on mechanical cutting. Now, mechanical cutting only goes 5 feet down, and obviously they can't get tight up under docks and all of that stuff. But that might be a decent compromise where you're still getting some of the weeds chopped out on the top of the lake if they grow that high, but you're not doing the chemical treatments. And I know people are all over on that type of thing. When I was young, we had controversies out at Blue Lake about chemical treatments, and my personal sentiment is that I don't like dumping a bunch of chemicals in the lake, but I get the people that are like, I don't want a bunch of weeds in the lake so that I can't use it for what I want to use it for too. And so looking for direction on that, the way that I think it should go is we should have some sort of petition by the people on the lake if we get over a certain percentage. I'm not sure that should be 50% because I think that's kind of still controversial. Maybe 75% for a supermajority, something like that. Then we stop doing chemical treatments, start doing mechanical. PLM has advised against that. You should do at least some chemical treatments. Nevertheless, that's what the discussion is for. Hopefully, if some people are on West Lake especially, show up to the meeting, let us know what you think in public comment at the beginning because it's an item, and at the end if you want to have a bigger discussion as well. Next, so just 2 things on the second page. One is maintenance salary. And so this was brought up by Nate as our head of maintenance, and I've thought about it over the last couple of years at various points as well. In the winter, things get kind of difficult with snow because you're at the mercy of the weather, and we certainly need the doors for fire plowed when it snows. The township can wait more and things like that. Other things, you can let it accumulate a little bit, but especially over like a weekend where the office wasn't being used, something like that. But it can occur for fire, and so we essentially need quite a bit of response. And we've been managing that, but it's weird to keep track of the hours. Plus, at various points in the year, you could have some, a week where it's like, it doesn't make sense to work a ton this week, but the next week it's a lot. And so it might make sense to move that from hourly to salary. That's what the discussion is for. See where the board is on that type of thing. We've obviously budgeted for it to be an hourly position, but it's quite a bit of guesstimating in that type of budget for how much we're going to spend on part-time, which I didn't look at the specific number for that recently, but it should be quite a bit less because I was trying to get some odds and ends done, and we didn't have too much over the summer because of trying to hire people in. Nevertheless, it might make sense to switch that over to salary so he just gets paid, which is how we have the zoning right now with Steve. That way he handles the stuff when he needs to handle it, and he has the meetings in the evenings and that type of thing. And that's how we have the fire chief and all of the electeds, because it's just whatever comes up, you have to handle it, and that way the pay just ends up being consistent and that type of thing. As of now, have talked about paying a premium for the hours outside of normal hours in the winter when he's plowing but then it's more to keep track of and that type of thing too. So that's why that's up for discussion. And finally, we have food sovereignty, which is obviously my thing I've been pushing on. And, it's difficult because I want it to be a thing that gains traction. And I'm working from some of the legislation that we've seen happen in Maine, which I think went in a very good direction over a decade, from a town all the way up to a constitutional amendment. But I'm trying to get something that is going to gain traction, but also does what we want. The last discussion I had with the lawyer is that the way I had phrased it, at least at that point, it would include McDonald's, which is obviously not the point of that. And so I changed the definition of local foods slightly, and which I think holds more true for what it is. So I have that in there. I might have to consult with some more people. I was thinking about bringing it as a vote. That's why it's written up as a resolution this month, but just with some of these hesitancies, I don't want to prematurely pass it. And so I think another month of looking at it, hearing some more discussion, some public comment, the board comments on it, and maybe I'll reach out to some more people to consult on it a little bit and move forward and hopefully a decently strong place and position on that type of thing, and try to, get some of those things headed in a good direction, try to get a movement in some way of, like, this is a solid thing where you can do local foods in the local community, which makes Dalton a lot more resilient. It makes it a lot more resilient, and it's already a huge amount of the sentiment here. And so it's just how do you do that correctly in a way that's not going to cause a bunch of disasters? And what you get is, politically, if people want to move against you politically, then if you have a variety of issues, which we have a bunch of issues, right? We have people illegally camping on township land out in the woods and this type of stuff, and you change some sort of ordinance. Now, the problem that already existed gets blamed on the change, even though it predated the change. And so that type of thing happens a lot as well, because of people trying to game the political system and get sentiment to go their way. And so I'm trying to avoid those types of disasters and walk a line there where a lot of people can be on the same page, find common ground. And so that's essentially what I'm trying to think through, is try to find the common ground that leads in a good direction and localizes authority and power, and then creates a resilient food network where people can handle that on their own and have that fundamental right, because it's a fundamental right to food. People just missed it in the founding of the country because the founding fathers basically all had farms, so it really didn't make sense to put it in the Bill of Rights because they didn't think it would be an issue. So that's part of what we're dealing with. That is the packet. That is the stuff on the agenda for the meeting on the 14th of November, 2022, 6 p.m. at the Township Hall. If anyone has any questions, thoughts, ideas, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out and let me know. My direct line at the office is area code 231-332-6700, or email supervisor@daltontownship.org. Thanks. Until next time, this is Jeff.